Don't shed any tears for these heartless scammers. Let's find out why. Starting with number 6. Goes the Weasel. Nigerian conman Godwin Nwaofor ran a sophisticated operation that preyed upon the dreams and trust of unsuspecting pensioners by conning them out of their retirements. The MO for this cunning fraud involved a suckers list, a compilation of potential victims who would receive bogus letters claiming they had won the Australian lottery. These letters, sent by a lottery agent, that targeted many American retirees, promising them a life-changing prize in exchange for a modest sum to release the funds. Believing they had struck it rich, the victims were conned into paying fees, including activation fees, and some even set up businesses to receive their supposed winnings, unknowingly laundering money for the scammers. And Nwaofor wasn't even the mastermind, but instead was a willing and enthusiastic lieutenant in the elaborate con. He worked alongside another Nigerian, Frank Onichanam, nicknamed Fizzy, for his love of vintage champagne. Onichanam was sentenced to 8 years for his role in the scam. While the victims faced financial ruin and emotional distress, Nwaofor enjoyed his ill-gotten wealth. He squandered money on luxury cars, gold jewelry, and extravagant nights out at London's top nightclubs and lavish champagne showers. However, the law eventually caught up with Nwaofor. As the sentence was handed down, Nwaofor, supposedly realizing the severity of his crimes, broke down in tears in the Central Criminal Court. But the judge wasn't moved by this display, describing Nwaofor's remorse as fake and calling his crying crocodile tears. In the end, Godwin Nwaofor got exactly what he deserved: 7 years in prison. His fake tears did nothing to ease his sentence, and in our opinion, make him look worse. Do you think he actually felt sad about running the scams? Number 5. Oliver Twisted. A disturbing trend emerged in the heart of New York City, where young children were being recruited into a network of theft and deception by adult caregivers. The leader of one such ring was apprehended by the police, shedding light on this troubling phenomenon. Mikkel Robinson from Staten Island was arrested and charged with a string of burglaries at Lower Manhattan bars and restaurants. However, what made this case particularly alarming is the involvement of his 2 young brothers, aged 11 and 13, in these criminal activities. The trio's crimes unfolded as they targeted 3 bars and restaurants, using a combination of cunning tactics and a disturbing twist on a classic con. The story began with the youngest brother, the 11-year-old, entering establishments, posing as a child seeking donations for a fictitious sports team. Once they gained the trust of unsuspecting victims, the children would often request access to their phones under the pretext of helping with payment apps. Little did the victims know this was a setup, and the kids would then transfer money. However, the criminal activities didn't stop there. In one incident, the 13-year-old brother entered an Italian restaurant and lit a bathroom trash can on fire, creating chaos as approximately 75 people were present. Quick action by the staff prevented any injuries, but the incident demonstrated the brazenness of these young criminals. Prosecutors didn't hold back and charged Robinson with a slew of charges. Despite the serious charges, Robinson was released on his own recognizance because the crimes didn't qualify for bail. Law enforcement was also on the hunt for at least 2 other adult handlers running similar operations. While the kids can't be held responsible, as they're undeniably pawns in a disturbing game, the situation highlighted the challenges faced by authorities in addressing this issue, particularly in a city where bail laws are becoming increasingly lax. In the end, this unfortunate saga reflects a concerning aspect of the new New York, where children are being manipulated into a life of crime, perpetuating cycles and making things worse. Number 4. Stealing for luxury. A former hospital worker and her Navy veteran husband ran a scheme that compromised the personal information of more than 80 patients and also funded a lavish shopping spree at some of the country's top luxury retailers, such as Saks Fifth Avenue. The masterminds behind this scam were Kyle Steed, a former employee of Lenox Hill Hospital, and his wife, Crystal Steed. Kyle, who had worked at the hospital for several years, was responsible for stealing sensitive patient data, primarily from elderly patients, then passing it on to his wife, Crystal, who went on a shopping spree. The couple's ill-gotten gains were astonishing and amounted to $300,000 worth of high-end merchandise. However, their plan sought to siphon off an additional $1 million from luxury retailers. The true extent of their heartless tactics became apparent when it was revealed that Crystal Steed had used patient information to exploit a deceased patient's credit card account a mere 2 hours after they had passed away. To further cover up their trail of deceit, Crystal would bypass security questions by fabricating scenarios such as being at a doctor's office, urgently requiring access to her credit card information for payment purposes. In other instances, she would claim to be conducting holiday shopping with her grandchildren and insist that any fraud prevention holds be lifted from the targeted accounts. Once she gained access to these accounts, she manipulated credit limits, addresses, and phone numbers to facilitate her fraudulent shopping. While Kyle Steed had no prior criminal record, his wife Crystal had 2 open cases, including one for shoplifting. Crystal eventually took a plea deal on charges of grand larceny and identity theft. She was sentenced to 4 to 8 years. Kyle was fired from his job at Lenox Hill Hospital, but his lawyers said that he had gotten a job at Westchester Medical Center. Hopefully, he's not able to access any patient records in the future. Number 3. Hungry ATMs. 2 thieves from Birmingham in the UK named Tarek Sharif and Kay Schneider embarked on a scheme in South Wales, targeting ATMs and scamming old people out of a total of £25,000. Their plan involved the use of advanced technology to steal bank cards. The criminal duo's activity began with their first victim being an 80-year-old man who was at a Sainsbury's store in Bridgend. Sharif approached the elderly man while wearing a surgical mask and a baseball cap, clearly preying on the vulnerability of his chosen target. Sharif told the man that the ATM was out of order and advised him to cancel the transaction. As the elderly man canceled it, Sharif leaned over and manipulated the machine. Sharif had a sophisticated electronic device that enabled him to force the ATM to eat the bank card. When the man returned to his vehicle, he was shocked to discover that £500 had vanished from his account. This experience left him deeply shaken, and his daughter said that he had lost his confidence and often remained tearful as a result of the incident. The same tactic was used at another ATM where a 71-year-old woman fell victim to this tactic, also losing £500 in the process. The psychological impact on this victim was significant, and she expressed fear of using ATMs and had a constant sense of unease in public. Yet another older gentleman experienced a similar ordeal when his bank card was eaten by a machine outside a local shop, resulting in a £500 loss. However, Sharif's criminal activities extended beyond these incidents, and he continued using his device to target other people. After an ATM ate 2 cards belonging to a woman, Sharif engaged her in conversation while manipulating the machine. Investigation later revealed that £700 had been stolen from her account, and the potential loss could have been as high as £14,000 had her bank not taken action to block the card. The crime spree ultimately came to an end when police arrested Sharif and Schneider, charging them with multiple offenses. Schneider first said he was just the driver for Sharif, but evidence proved his involvement in the criminal activities. Both defendants ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges. Andrew Cohen, who defended both men in court, said that Sharif had genuine remorse for his actions. Cohen also said that Schneider was influenced by a challenging and tragic background. At the sentencing, Sharif was sentenced to 28 months behind bars, while Schneider received a 20-month prison term. Half of their respective sentences will be served in custody, with the remainder subject to parole conditions. Number 2. The Naughty List. A postal worker in New York City named Arlene Washington was arrested for stealing not just thousands of dollars in cash, but also a child's letter to Santa Claus. The arrest shed light on a years-long scam orchestrated by Washington, who worked at the city's main processing center where all NYC mail goes before being delivered. Manhattan federal prosecutors revealed that Washington had been pocketing up to $1,200 a week by rifling through people's personal mail. Her actions left unsuspecting New Yorkers without their valued possessions and gifts, but what truly exposed the depths of her heartlessness was her admitting to stealing a kid's letter to Santa. Washington's arrest came after a Long Island resident complained about receiving an opened anniversary card in the mail. The resident went on to say that the lottery tickets and an Amazon gift card that were supposed to be inside the card had vanished. U.S. postal inspectors launched an investigation and tracked purchases made with the missing Amazon gift card back to Washington's address in Queens. Observations made by a postal inspector further confirmed her activities. On multiple occasions, the inspector saw Washington rifling through the mail and removing its contents, which is weird that the inspector let it happen more than once after seeing it, but whatever. As Christmas drew near, Washington's greed knew no bounds. She brazenly opened a greeting card, extracted a bundle of cash, and stuffed it into her glove in plain sight of the postal inspector. Confronted by the inspector a few days later, Washington confessed to her crimes. She admitted to stealing an estimated $100 to $300 per night, approximately 4 nights a week, for almost 10 years. A search of her possessions revealed $460 in cash, Starbucks gift cards, lottery scratch-off tickets, and the stolen child's letter to Santa. When asked why she took the letter destined for the North Pole, Washington said that it was the stickers attached to the envelope that had lured her into doing it. This admission paints a pretty clear picture of what type of person Darlene Washington is, since she not only lacks remorse, but was willing to ruin the magic of Christmas for some kid. And for those of you who have kids, you probably already know that there are only so many Christmases you get before kids start catching on. What she was planning on doing with the kid's letter or stickers is anyone's guess. If you're enjoying this video, please be sure to stay tuned right here for even more heartless criminals. Number 1. Preying on the most vulnerable. In a chilling twist of cruelty, heartless scammers devised a scheme that preyed on the vulnerability of grieving family members. The scam unfurled as individuals scoured online obituaries seeking out their unsuspecting prey, the grieving loved ones of the recently departed. Posing as representatives from funeral homes, they reached out to these people for a deposit to secure funeral services or cremation. Just a single day after saying goodbye to her husband of 22 years, a man who had succumbed to lung cancer, Lisa Ann Motto received a call from someone claiming to work at the funeral home entrusted with her husband's cremation. He told Lisa there was a $5,000 bill and suggested she make an initial payment of $2,500 via Zelle or Apple Pay. Grief-stricken and not thinking clearly, Motto attempted to comply with this demand, only to have the payment flagged as suspicious. It was her vigilant son who intervened, recognizing that something was off. The call was terminated, but the scars of the ordeal remained. Perpetrators often resorted to spoofing tactics, manipulating caller IDs to make their calls appear as if they originate from the funeral home in question, confusing their unsuspecting victims. While numerous funeral homes took to social media to sound the alarm about this scheme, some were still ensnared. Another incident went down at the Rainsville Funeral Home in Alabama, where an impersonator exploited a grieving widow by posing as a funeral director. The caller ID displayed the funeral home's name, so no one was suspicious of the call. Only when the genuine funeral director intervened and identified herself did the scammer quickly terminate the call. Denise Leicester's family found themselves in a similar situation when, following the cremation arrangements and the posting of an obituary online, a call asking for a $200 deposit for alleged insurance came. Suspicion prompted Leicester to abruptly hang up the call, later confirming with the funeral home that it had indeed been a scam. The FTC issued an unequivocal warning: resist giving in to immediate pressure, and if you have any doubts about the caller's authenticity, contact the funeral home directly. What's the sadder scam here? This Brazilian girl scammed her own mom for over $100 million, while this guy flipped out and decided to rob a corner store after losing his life savings to crypto. Let's get right to it. Number 5. Wedding hostage. UK man Lewis Crosby had it all. He was a cornerstone member of his community and was set to marry a girl from Singapore that he had met online. So, what could have gone wrong? He threw his life savings, including the money for an agreed dowry and even his rent, into a cryptocurrency scam back in November of 2021. After losing everything, Crosby snapped. About an hour after it all went down, he formulated a drastic plan. The man picked up his air pistol, every bit as illegal to use in a crime as a real pistol, and headed to his local premier shop. Crosby walked in, rocking a hood, shades, and a scarf, and proceeded to the counter. He took out the air pistol, which looked just like the real deal, and pointed it between the counter and the clear barrier directly at one of the clerks. He demanded all the money they could give him. Under normal circumstances, this story may have been a bit longer. There may have been an escape and a period as a fugitive involved. After all, a lot of retail employees, when staring down a barrel, will gladly give away their employer's money. The two on duty at Premier that day in November, however, weren't having any of it. The pair went on the offensive, Even without the knowledge that they weren't up against a real gunman, they approached and subdued Crosby. One of the terrified employees gathered their nerves and marched right up to the shooter. The dude actually grabbed the gun and got it away from Crosby, then put him on the ground and held him there. There were, of course, a million ways this could have gone seriously wrong. One of the workers even grabbed a sharp, broken-off broomstick just in case. The situation could have gotten very out of hand very quickly, but the shopkeepers simply kept Crosby in check until the police arrived. When the case hit Newcastle Crown Court, Judge Julie Clementson didn't believe she was looking at a career criminal. Instead, what she saw was a man who regularly made a positive impact in his community. Everybody involved in the case agreed that Crosby was a wreck. As if the emotional roller coaster of losing his life savings wasn't enough, his desperation made him think it was a good idea to commit a serious crime. To say the man was in shambles would be an understatement. The court ended up handing down a suspended 2-year sentence. Essentially, Crosby was put on probation. He's been given rehabilitation and community service stipulations and can avoid jail time by following them. Obviously, if he commits a crime during this period, he'll end up serving his original sentence. His bride-to-be and her family were surprisingly forgiving. As of this writing, the wedding is still on, with no date set just yet. Given there was a dowry involved, Crosby will have to make that back and get his life on track before he can hope to open a new chapter with a partner. Number 4. Involuntary scamming. Kay Ferguson, a financial manager from Australia, fell victim to 2 scams back-to-back. And then she was manipulated into doing some scamming of her own. She gave out some of her own money to scammers, but she's no ordinary victim. Around $1.1 million was scammed from her employer, Moala Water Ski Club. It's one of the sad truths of the internet that older folks and those looking for love can be gullible, and she was both. After separating from her husband in 2020, Ferguson began using a 50 and up online dating service aptly named Singles 50s, where she ran into not 1, but 2 troublesome men. Between the 2 of them, she cleaned out her personal bank accounts and stole from work no less than 27 times between December of 2020 and January of 2021. It all started when Ferguson met an unidentified man on the service who decided she was ripe for blackmail. He hit her with one of the oldest tricks in the book. He used her own lust against her. After convincing her to send him explicit images, he demanded that she pay him $130,000 to avoid those images making their way to her children. You would think she'd cut her losses at that point and hop off the dating service, or at least wisen up. But you'd be wrong. A second man, using the false name William David Rodovan, was next in line. He ran a scam on Ferguson that was a bit more innocent, but much more effective. Claiming to be an engineer, he had her call him at work. During their chat, there was a loud noise and he suddenly hung up. The next time the pair talked, this catfish told his victim that there had been an explosion and some of his workers were dead. With his quote-unquote business in ruins, he didn't have the funds to pay out severance and other costs to the families of the deceased. This is where Ferguson comes in. After handing over about $225,000 from her own pocket, Ferguson was broke. The scammer, formerly known as Rodovan, however, wasn't done yanking on her heartstrings. He said he needed even more money, and Ferguson didn't disappoint. She used her position as financial officer to transfer money from her employer's business account to offshore accounts held by the scammer. Investigators and court officials would later prove that Ferguson dipped into the company's accounts at least 27 times. But it's highly likely she did it many more times than they can pin on her. The icing on the cake here? One of those illegitimate transfers was about $40,000, which Ferguson sent to herself to pay contractors for work on her house. In a show of instant karma, the house wound up being sold to pay back her employer. Ferguson's crime spree lasted a month or so before the water ski club's owner noticed something was amiss. He asked the police for help with finding the discrepancy in his finances. It didn't take investigators very long to figure out what was going on. Ferguson didn't do much to cover her tracks. Had they not figured it out, she likely would have continued sending money. After being caught in January and tried in March, Ferguson ultimately entered a guilty plea. Her people were reluctant to put all the details out there right away, but changed their tune when the judge threatened to reject the plea. In June of 2022, the courts decided on a 3-year sentence of intensive corrections to be served in Ferguson's community. Moala Water Ski Club CEO Peter Duncan said he was disappointed about how it all went down, but he's not mad at Ferguson. In the end, she was just another sucker. Number 3. Elderly twist. A scammer out of New York by the name of Stephen Pagertanis caught a harsh 15-year sentence for his crimes. But that's actually less than the length of time he ran his grand scam. Formerly a financial advisor, Pagertanis used his knowledge and position to steal some $9 million from elderly investors over the course of 18 years. He ran the grift from 2000 to 2018 and mostly targeted the elderly, a detail that the courts dug into in his sentencing. Pagertanis was most recently working with Lombard Securities Incorporated, a network of independent stockbrokers with its HQ in Maryland. His relationship was more affiliate than employee, allowing him flexibility with little oversight. Naturally, his license to be a financial advisor and stockbroker was revoked when the case broke, and he confessed. The scam was a simple Ponzi scheme on the surface, but Pagertanis was more qualified than anybody to run it. Already a legitimate and well-versed investment broker, he had no problem luring victims in, falsifying documents, and balancing out payouts with his take from the top. He was able to run the scam completely on his own for a staggering 18 years only because of this knowledge and skill set. The cycle would begin with an unsuspecting victim offered an investment opportunity. Pagertanis would promise investors that their principal was safe, a bold move in any investment vehicle that should have raised a red flag. Those that didn't see through the ruse were promised a fixed return, usually between 4 and 8% per year. That ROI doesn't sound like much, but it's a substantial buffer to savings and a higher rate than many legitimate investments. Once the investors were on board, they would wire money directly to an entity that was secretly controlled by Pagertanis. He would pass that money through a number of external accounts and entities to launder it. Once the money was sufficiently hard to trace, Pagertanis would send some off the top to his own account. He would also render promised payouts to investors who had been on board longer. Along the way, he would falsify documents, account statements, and other paperwork showing ownership, interest in investments, and other pertinent info. The victims of his scam were spread across the nation. Of some $13 million invested, clients lost around $9 million in all. Janice Gukwa from Florida reportedly lost $250,000. Hope Dragon from Tiny Pachog couldn't attend the hearing due to health issues stemming from the sheer stress of the financial losses she suffered. Instead, her children, Nicole Gensel and Ron Hulson, attended. 2 more victims lost $3 million and $2.5 million. This case takes an interesting turn at the court phase. While most scammers would simply face criminal charges from the feds, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed a civil suit. He's essentially been barred from having anything to do with the investment world. A judgment was also passed down that ordered him to pay over $6 million to his victims. Even with the $5 million he paid back into the scam over the time he ran it, this would still leave victims short by about $2 to $3 million. Stephen Pagertanis was 59 when he was caught, which means he started the scam at age 41. Unless time gets cut off, he's going to be getting out of prison when he's 74. He was handed a 15-year sentence along with 3 years of supervised release afterwards. Number 2. Senior targeting. Christopher Dougherty, an investment planner out of San Diego, pulled off a $6 million Ponzi scheme. The man targeted the most vulnerable in society, being affluent, elderly folk. Like most Ponzi schemes, this one fell apart when the money ran out at the top, meaning the scammer was unable to continue paying new investors. The way it all unraveled, though, wasn't like most Ponzi schemes, where your average scammer may try to just disappear when it all comes crashing down. This guy filed for bankruptcy. He racked up debt through illegal actions, then tried to go through official courts to have it dispelled. Dougherty filed for bankruptcy in 2018 and got busted in 2019. Had he not made that filing, he may have been able to get more suckers on board and continue the scam. This wasn't even his first run-in with the law. He got caught stealing from a youth baseball league back in 2011, making this second offense that much worse. Dougherty's laser focus on rich elderly folk was a sticking point for the scam. This particular type of sucker, usually very gullible and with lots of savings at their command, reportedly made up a bit more than half of his victims. He would mainly target those looking to grow and diversify their retirement savings to live their twilight years a bit better or leave a nest egg for future generations. The scam at its surface is pretty simple. For most victims, Dougherty started them off with safe, traditional investments. This would be a decent way to run a Ponzi scheme if you decided to do one, but he wanted more. He came up with bold and unconventional investment vehicles to grab more victims' attention. Naturally, they were all fake. Most of his investments outside of the traditional realm centered around businesses that he purported to own or farmland that he supposedly owned and would eventually be pulling a profit from. In some of these cases, he scammed more than just the investors. One couple couple living on a farm he may or may not have owned had their power cut at one point because they thought that Dougherty would be footing the bill. Sharon and David Vega were two of Dougherty's most prominent victims and were instrumental in bringing the whole thing down. The business relationship started some 17 years ago, and they didn't suspect a thing until the payouts dried up. Interestingly, the scamming for these two didn't start until a few years ago, which means Dougherty didn't try to scam two of his most prominent customers until he was already seeing some measure of success. When Dougherty did begin defrauding two of his most prominent customers, it started innocent enough. He instructed them to take some money out of one investment vehicle that they had together and put it somewhere else. Specifically, he wanted them to put something into private placement for some unnamed farm subsidy accounts. They did what he asked to the tune of about $30,000. Before too long, checks to the Vegas began bouncing. David always seemed to have an excuse at the ready, but Sharon and David were having none of it. They eventually went to the authorities and the media, kicking off the investigation that would ultimately spell an end to Dougherty's big scam. The investigation even uncovered other victims, at least two of whom were knocked financially flat by the scam. Jerry and Diane, who declined to use their last names in the reports, were left relying on their children to survive. Dougherty's scam put him high on the hog for many years. Before it all came tumbling down, he was using the ill-gotten gains for home renovation, travel, and college tuition, among other expenses. The fake investments he offered to clients were all eventually found to be just that, fake. In July of 2020, the story finally met its conclusion. Filing for bankruptcy in 2018 and catching charges in 2019, Dougherty pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. All told, his victims only got back about $3 million of the over $10 million that he took, leaving them collectively $7 million down. Number 1. Mom Scam. Brazilian Sabine Cole Bogici was arrested for scamming her own mother out of somewhere around 724 million real, the equivalent of just over $142 million. She ran the scam for 2 years and managed to get money, valuable paintings, and other goods out of the deal. Sabine didn't act alone. Diana Rosa, Aparecida Stanesco Vuletek, and Slavko Vuletek, along with 4 other unnamed parties, were also brought in as part of the scam, according to official records. Together, they started out by simply tricking Sabine's 82-year-old mom, Genevieve Bogici, into handing over valuables. Before too long, though, things started to escalate. They continued pressuring the woman to wring more money and valuables from her. Eventually, the operation took a sinister turn before she finally had enough and went to the cops. Genevieve endured being physically threatened, intimidated, and even isolated by her own daughter. The scam began when Sabine set her sights on Tarsila do Amaral's celebrated painting, Sol Poente. Genevieve's late husband, Jean Bogici, was an art collector and left her a great deal of valuable art when he passed away. Sol Poente and 2 other pieces by the same artist fell into the hands of Sabine and her associates, worth around 700 million real together. Sol Poente, in particular, had even had a stint in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Tarsila do Amaral is thought of by some as the mother of Brazilian modern art, having produced 7 widely hailed works of art around the 1920s. 3 of these, all originals, were scooped up by Jean Bogici and later taken by Sabine and her crew. The other 2 paintings were Osono and Pont Neuf, and the 3 together formed the bulk of the gain from the scam. Sabine wouldn't have been able to pull this off on her own. The first step in the scam was to bring associates on board who would fill key roles in throwing Genevieve off guard. Chief among these were psychics. The first so-called psychic to approach Genevieve did so out of the blue and rocked her world with the grim premonition that her daughter would soon die. Sabine kept feeding this psychic and others personal information that was used to scare and coerce Genevieve. As the scam progressed, the psychics not only took fees from Genevieve, they convinced her to part with valuables. The first thing on the list was Sol Poente. The team worked on the beleaguered mum to make her believe that the painting was cursed and tied to her daughter's upcoming demise. Under the guise of praying for and purifying the objects, the psychics convinced Genevieve to let them haul the paintings away. Amaral wasn't the only indirect victim here. Influential artwork from a number of Brazilian masters was also involved in the heist. The works of Rubens Gertschmann, Cicero Dias, and Alberto Guignard were stolen, among many others. All told, at least 16 paintings went missing. Authorities wasted no time once they were brought into the picture. Investigation proceedings, including tracking the the paintings began immediately. In August of 2022, police began executing warrants, making arrests. Along with Sabine herself, authorities have nabbed 4 other suspects as of this writing. As for recovering the paintings, many were found in the homes of suspects during raids. Others have made their way to brokers and galleries. Of the 16 confirmed missing, 11 are officially back in the hands of their rightful owner. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comment section what you'd rather have: $10,000 cash or the chance to punch someone in the face of your choosing.